Hello, ladies and gentlemen. The V3 has finally released. Now, I say finally, but I've known it's been released for like over 6 hours. I was just too lazy to make a video about it. Now, as you guys know, if you've watched the previous videos from me, I have no interest in Himiko. I haven't had any for the past few weeks. I haven't looked into her kit. So I'm not going to be covering Himiko in this video because, no joke, I'm just genuinely clueless when it comes to the way her kit works, meta value, this and that. I can't tell you anything about her, right? I'd just be lying. So let's talk about the fake characters, which I actually do know about, and let's get into Gilga real quick. Now, Gilga received buffs across the board, which is amazing to see. Now, the biggest buff that he got was to his ultimate. Before, it had a 400% multiplier done to all enemies. However, there was also an additional bounce attack on this ultimate that made for the second 50% of the ultimate's damage. It was 10 instances of bounce at a 40% multiplier, which isn't bad, but it isn't anything exceptional. With this being said, this shit got massively buffed. Nothing changed about his original damage multiplier that isn't bounce. However, his bounce multiplier skyrocketed from 40% per bounce to 100%, meaning the total multiplier of his ult now is 1400%, when before it was 800. This shit got a 75% increase, even though his ult was already a pretty strong damage, right? So, with that being said, his synergy in, let's say, E2 Ashvale Emblade comps, oh, why did I have to lose on the E2? Is now significantly stronger, right? It's way better. His ult damage is just so fucking stupidly strong that with E2, Emblade, and Ashvale on the team, it's disgusting, right? So, Gilga is definitely now, in my opinion, a best in slot for Ashvale and Emblade, because it's not only this ult that got this buff, by the way, it's literally multipliers across the board. Everything got buffed. The only thing that got nerfed, which surprise to nobody, is his max energy, which isn't technically a nerf because they obviously compensate for this by changing the other energy regen numbers. However, also the joint attack. The joint attack was the main, or one of the main causes, alongside his fat 600 energy cost, behind the infinite ult loop that was possible with RMC on the Saber Gilga team. So they have reduced the amount of energy that is generated from 200 to 120. They have nerfed the multiplier from the joint attack so that it does total less damage. And they've removed the action advance that Saber used to get from the joint attack as well. Now, one thing that has been added to this joint attack is that once it triggers the next time Saber uses her ultimate, it will do 200% damage / twice the amount of damage than it usually would. So it seems like they're trying to remove this entire infinite ult loop and then basically compensating for it by allowing Saber's ults to do significantly more damage when she does get them, right? However, across after that, it's mainly just traces, E1, E2, everything got buffed. His E1 buff went from 25% attack to 60%. It's still not anything game changing, but at least something. His E2 as well got buffed, with it being a pretty significant change. The main target for his skill, the multiplier, gets a 100% buff, and then if I remember correctly, for adjacent targets it's 50%. Before, it was much smaller. It was like 30% main target and 20% adjacent boost. So it's a quite significant jump towards buffing his skills multiplier to make it, I guess, matter more and keep up with how much his ult got buffed as well. Are these E1 and E2 a must pull? No. However, they're actually decent in terms of fake collab unit Eidolons, and considering this guy's being given for free, meaning his E1 and E2 is technically equivalent to an E0 or E1 of a normal character, a lot of people might go for that, especially considering these fate banners, they last forever, right? They don't go anywhere. So because of this, a lot of people are going to have sweet time on their hands to end up getting enough pulls to get his E1 or E2 and massively buff his viability as a main DPS on an Ashe Emblade team or with Saber. Whatever you want to use him in. He's much, much better in any of the... Oh wait, no. I need to take that back. The Saber team did get nerfed, obviously. This is going to happen. But Ashe Emblade teams and main DPS teams are definitely better than they were before for those who prefer that. Right. Next, we go to Rin. Now, Rin basically received nerfs across the board. I don't think I saw a single buff except in one of her Eidolons, which is unfortunate for a lot of you. Now, as many of you know, Rin had this weird interaction where with certain teams, with Ceridra, and with her basic attacking enough to save up gem energy, she was able to basically nuke bosses for 10 million 2 times in a row with like 6 or 7 cost on a team. So now, obviously, this has been fixed so that she's not able to do this as strongly as she used to. Multiplier nerfs across the board so that her damage and her bounce damage isn't as high. However, alongside this, there was an addition to the joint attack, which I think is the only buff in the entirety of her kit, where now, if Archer uses 5 arrows within 1 turn, Rin will trigger her joint follow-up attack, regenerating 4 skill points and as well doing a little bit of damage, right? I'm not sure if this allows you to technically like double dip and trigger a joint attack twice, once from being low on skill points and the other time from using 5 arrows in a single turn. That remains to be seen until I see a little more gameplay. I feel like they wouldn't allow that. I feel like that's a little too strong, but who knows, right? Who knows? Unfortunately, I just am reading off the kit update here. And then after this, we have a nerf to her buff for Archer. So before she gave 100% crit damage, now it's been nerfed to 70%. And also she used to give 20% defense shred, now that's been changed to 10% res pen. Now in my opinion, I've seen some people losing their shit over this change. However, I don't think it actually matters that much because most Archer teams, unless you are at high investment, don't have any defense ignore. The most you usually have is 20% from the Genius Relic set against specifically quantum weak enemies. However, if you want to use an actual reliable relic set that works against all enemies like Scholar, right? In this case, you actually don't have any defense shred on an Archer team at all. And for those maybe more unaware, defense shred is a incredibly weak buff when it's just starting out. This is how it works. It's an exponential increase where at the beginning, putting in like 10, 20, 30% defense shred doesn't really yield many gains. But the more and more you stack, the more and more strong it gets, to the point where near 100%, it becomes diabolically stupid. But with this being said, there's no one on Archer's team, if you're not using Genius, to give defense shred, meaning this 10% res pen versus the old 20% defense shred will not be that noticeable unless once again you have a whale team of like, I don't know, you have him on Genius against quantum weak enemies, you maybe have him E2 so he can inflict his weakness so you can always take advantage of this. You have E2 Sparkle who adds an additional 30% defense shred. In this case, this would basically be the only case where the defense shred being defense shred instead of res pen actually matters. This is the only one, right? So that's that. Then after this, the only other notable change is to her E2. Her E2 used to give a 10% original damage buff towards skills. Now it's 30%. That's quite nice. That's really, really nice. Your archer arrows do 30% more damage no matter what. This is original damage, by the way. This is a damage bonus. This is an original damage increase, which makes it that much stronger. So with that being said, E2 Rin became much more of a bait for those who really appreciate playing her with Archer. Her main DPS capabilities and even her buffing capabilities outside of E2 basically completely nerfed across the board, and Gilga has become much more promising outside of Saber teams, while in Saber teams, I believe it's still a strong team, okay? Don't get it twisted. I believe, and I can imagine it's still a like top 5 team in the game currently, but it's just not on the disgusting level that it was in the previous versions, where you could completely abuse RMC and Gilga synergy, right? No longer is that bullshittery allowed, which has made them weaker, and that's just how the cookie crumbles, right? So that's all I have for you guys today. Hope you all have a great day. Hope you all have a great night. Peace out.